On a snowbound night, her fortress of solitude cracks with a single knock, and the vampire king stands at her door, smiling like danger. He's come to claim what she's guarded for years, but her fear collides with a truth that changes everything. Now she must choose, protect her loneliness or step into his dark kingdom and write her own fate. Some nights feel like they were written for someone else, the kind you'd swear you've seen in a movie and still can't forget. But this one was real, cold enough to sting your lungs, quiet enough to make your own thoughts sound loud. Snow pressed against the cabin windows in soft, steady waves, gathering on the sill like a white breath that wouldn't leave. Inside, the only warmth came from a small iron stove and a lamp whose flame trembled whenever the wind found a crack in the wood. Alara kept her hands close to the heat, not because she was weak, but because she'd learned the hard way that winter took whatever you left unguarded. She lived here on purpose, far from village gossip, far from the pity that clung to her name after the loss that had hollowed out her life. Solitude wasn't a mood for Alara, it was a promise. A fence she'd built with silence, nailed together with routine. Boil water, mend a sleeve, sweep the floor, pretend the world couldn't reach her anymore. The knock came anyway. Not loud, not violent, just certain. 3 taps, spaced like someone who knew exactly how fear moved through a room. The lamp flame shivered. The stove gave a small metallic click as it cooled. For a moment, Alara didn't breathe. She listened for laughter, for footsteps running away, for anything that would make it ordinary. There was only the wind, and beneath it a presence. Alara reached for the nearest thing that felt like courage, a short iron poker used to shift coals. She held it the way her father once showed her, steady at the center even if her wrists shook. Then she stepped to the door, careful on the creaking boards, and pressed her eye to the narrow gap between frame and latch. A man stood on her porch, as if the storm had made room for him. He was tall, his long, pale hair loose over a dark coat that looked too fine for a place like this. Snowflakes landed on his shoulders and didn't melt right away, as if the cold recognized him as kin. Yet his posture wasn't threatening. It was patient, almost respectful. Alara's throat tightened. She told herself not to open it. She told herself the world didn't get to knock on her door and demand she feel something again. The man lifted his gaze, and in that instant she understood the difference between being watched and being seen. His eyes were an unusual gray, like winter sky just before dawn, not hungry, not cruel, weighted like someone who had carried too many endings. He spoke without raising his voice, as if he didn't want to scare the night. Lara. Her grip on the poker slipped a fraction. No one here knew her name, no one should have. She unlatched the door without deciding to. The wood swung open a hand's width, spilling warm light onto the porch. Cold air rushed in, sharp as a reprimand. Alara kept the chain hooked, the gap too narrow for him to enter, and held the poker where he could see it. "Who are you?" Her voice came out steadier than she felt. The man's mouth curved, not into a smirk, not into triumph, but into something sadder, like relief with guilt threaded through it. "I have been called many things," he said, "most of them unkind, but tonight you may call me what I am." He paused as if tasting the honesty. "I am the king of the vampires." The words should have sounded ridiculous. Instead, they landed heavy, like a truth her bones already recognized. The air between them changed. The storm seemed to quiet, listening. Alara's heart hammered once, hard enough to hurt. Every story she'd ever heard tried to rise in her mind. Monsters, curses, blood. Yet the man on her porch didn't look like a nightmare. He looked like someone who'd walked a long way without resting. "And you came here," Alara said, forcing each word to behave. "To do what?" His gaze flicked to the chain on the door, and something like humility softened his face. He didn't reach for the handle. He didn't test her boundary. He simply stood there, hands open at his sides, letting her see he carried no weapon. "To claim your solitude," he said quietly. "Not to take it from you, but because it was never meant to be only yours." Alara's breath caught. Anger sparked, hot, sudden, protective. "You don't get to own anything about me." "I know," his voice lowered further, rough at the edges. "That is why I knocked." Behind him, in the tree line beyond the porch, the darkness shifted, too smooth to be wind, too deliberate to be snow. A shape moved where no shape should move, and the horseshoe of Alara's fear snapped shut around her ribs. The king noticed it too. His shoulders went tense, not with excitement, but with alarm. He took one slow step back from her door, placing himself between Alara and whatever watched from the woods. Alara, he said, and for the first time her name sounded like a plea. I can't cross your threshold unless you invite me, but something else can. The shadow in the trees slid closer, swallowing the snowlight. The king's eyes met hers, steady and urgent. Will you open the door and let me in? The chain trembled when Alara's fingers touched it, not because the metal was cold, but because her decision was heavier than it should have been. She could slam the door and pretend courage meant never needing anyone. She could keep her promise to solitude, even if it cost her everything else. Another sound came from the forest, soft, like a sigh dragged through dry leaves. It didn't belong in winter. It didn't belong in the world at all. Alara looked at the man on her porch, the Vampire King, a title that should have made her laugh or scream or do anything except feel the strange, sharp ache of recognition. He wasn't staring at her like prey. He was watching her like someone waiting for a verdict. "Oh, you swear you won't hurt me," she said, as if words could nail truth to the air. His throat moved like he had to swallow something older than pride. "On my crown and on my hunger," he answered, "I will not harm you." Alara unhooked the chains. The door opened wide, spilling warm lamplight onto the snow. For a breath, the king didn't move. He stepped over the threshold slowly, almost reverently, like the act required permission from something sacred. The instant he entered, the air in the cabin changed, still cold, still winter, but steadier. The lamp flame lifted as if it had been holding its breath. The king's shoulders loosened, and Alara realized he'd been bracing himself to be rejected. He didn't look around like someone taking possession. He looked around like someone remembering what home used to mean. A dark smear slid along the edge of the porch where light didn't reach. It pressed against the door frame, testing, searching for the smallest gap in Alara's courage. The king moved between Alara and the doorway without being asked. "Stay behind me," he said, and there was no command in it, only care. Alara's hands tightened around the poker. "What is it?" His voice turned quiet, solemn. "A hollow. It follows loneliness the way wolves follow blood trails. It doesn't bite, it empties." He glanced at her and something pained flickered in his eyes. "It will wear your grief like a face if you let it." The hollow pushed closer. The lamp dimmed as if the darkness could drink light. Alara felt her chest tighten with an old panic, the kind that came with memories you never invited but always fed. The king lifted his hand, palm outward. He didn't chant, he didn't threaten. He simply breathed, slow and controlled, and the shadows in the room seemed to pause as if they recognized authority in him. Then he did something Alara didn't expect. He took a step back away from power and said, almost to himself, "I will not make war in your home." He reached for a small pouch at his belt and set it on the table carefully, the way you set down something fragile. Salt, fine as powdered snow. He sprinkled a thin line at the threshold, humble and old-fashioned, like a prayer her grandmother might have used. "The salt," Alara's voice cracked on disbelief. The king's mouth twitched, almost smiling. "Monsters dislike simple things," he murmured. "Simple things remind them they can be resisted." The hollow surged, silent and furious, pushing at the doorway as if it hated being told no. The salt line held, the lamp steadied, the cabin stayed hers. But the hollow didn't retreat. It leaned closer, and Alara heard it, not with her ears but inside her mind. A voice that sounded like her own on her worst nights. "No one is coming, no one stays, this is all you are." Alara's knees went weak. The king looked back at her and his expression changed. The fear in her was familiar to him, not because he enjoyed it, but because he carried a version of it like a wound that never finished healing. "You are not alone in that thought," he said softly, "but you don't have to obey it." The hollow pressed harder. The salt line began to darken, as if something unseen was trying to melt it from the other side. The cabin door rattled once, and Alara realized with sudden horror that it wasn't trying to get in the way a creature would. It was trying to be invited. The voice in her head sweetened, turning gentle, turning clever. Alara opened the door wider. Let me in, I can give him back to you. Her breath hitched at the word him. The king's head snapped toward the doorway. His jaw tightened, not with anger, with dread. It knows your loss, he said, and it will use it. The door rattled again, and this time the sound came from inside the wood, as if knuckles were tapping from the cabin's heart. Alara stared, frozen, as a third knock sounded from the wrong side of the door. Alara backed away until she felt the table edge press into her thighs. The poker shook in her grip. The cabin had always creaked and sighed in winter, but this was different. This was a deliberate rhythm, like someone practicing patience. The king didn't move to open the door. He moved to close Alara's world down to something manageable. He lowered his voice. Look at me, he said. Alara's eyes found his again, gray, steady, unexpectedly human. Breathe in, he coached, slow enough that her lungs followed. Now out. The knocking continued, polite and wrong. Taps, taps, tap. Alara's throat tightened around a name she hadn't spoken in months. It said it could bring him back. The king's face softened in a way that startled her. Compassion unarmored. It cannot bring anyone back, he said. It can only mimic the shape your heart is desperate to touch. For the first time since he arrived, the king looked tired. Not tired of the storm, but tired of being the only wall between darkness and people who didn't deserve it. Alara swallowed. If you're a king, why are you here alone? The question landed like a stone in still water. He hesitated, and in that pause she heard something else in the cabin. The faint crackle of the stove, the whisper of snow against glass, and the fragile fact that he was choosing honesty over intimidation. My court would not approve of me coming, he said. They would prefer I take what I need. Alara flinched. What you need? He nodded once, slow. Your solitude. The hollow's whisper slid back into her mind, pleased. See, he wants it. He will take it. The king watched her face change and spoke before the fear could root. Not as a theft, he said quickly, as a shelter. Alara's brow furrowed. That makes no sense. It does, he answered, and the grief in his voice made it sound like a confession. Because solitude like yours is rare, it's powerful. It is a boundary you built with pain, and boundaries can become wards. Alara's hands went numb around the iron poker. You're saying my loneliness is useful. I'm saying your loneliness is dangerous, he corrected, gentle but firm. Not because you deserve punishment, because something in the dark has learned to hunt it. The knocking grew softer, almost tender, like a friend asking to come in from the cold. Alara hated how much she wanted to believe it. The king turned slightly toward the door, still blocking it, his posture protective rather than possessive. Long ago, he said, my kind made a bargain to survive without becoming beasts. We promised restraint, we promised humility, not all of us kept it. His eyes flicked to the lamplight, to the warmth. A curse followed our broken promises. The hollow is not one creature, it is what's left when hunger outgrows conscience. Alara's chest tightened, and it's here because of you. The king closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, there was no excuse in them. It found you because of me, he admitted. I have tried to keep it far from human doors, but you, he breathed out, as if surrendering the last of his pride. You were already hiding in the exact place it likes to feed. Alara's anger flared again, bright and protective. So you came to claim my solitude before it could. Oh, yes, he said, and to ask you properly if you will let me help you carry it. That sentence hit her harder than any threat could have. Carry it, not take it, not own it, share it. The hollow knocked again, and this time the voice wore warmth like a stolen coat. Alara, you're tired. Let someone else decide. Open the door. Alara's eyes filled without permission. She hated the weakness. She hated that grief could still steer her hands. The king's gaze stayed on her, steady as the stove's heat. "I do not want your obedience," he said. "I want your choice." Outside, snow whipped in hard gusts. The porch boards groaned. The salt line at the threshold had turned gray, thinning like an old promise. Alara whispered, "What happens if it gets in?" The king's voice went almost inaudible. "It will speak with every voice you miss until you stop being able to tell which thoughts are yours." The knocking stopped. The silence fell so suddenly it felt like pressure on her ears. Then, from the far corner of the room, where no door existed, came a sound like fingertips on wood. Tab, tab, tab. Alara turned, dread blooming cold in her stomach, and saw the wall panel beside her father's old coat hook shiver, as if something on the other side had found a new way to ask permission. The cabin was small. There was nowhere for secrets to hide, no hallway to retreat into, no staircase to climb, no crowd to disappear in. That was why Alara had chosen it. Now it felt like the walls themselves had turned traitor. The king moved fast but not reckless. He placed himself between Alara and the trembling panel, then looked back at her as if she were the one holding the power. "Tell me the truth," Alara demanded, voice shaking. "Can you stop it?" A muscle in his jaw tightened. "I can hold it off," he said. "Stopping it requires something I cannot do alone." The panel shuddered again. A thin seam appeared in the wood, hairline at first, then wider, as if winter had decided to crack the cabin open from the inside. Alara forced her feet to move. She grabbed a blanket from the chair and threw it over the coat hook, her father's coat still hanging there like a ghost she refused to bury. The simple act steadied her. She didn't know why, it just did. The king noticed, his eyes softened. "That coat," he said almost to himself, "he kept it." Alara froze. "You knew my father." The king's gaze dropped as if the floorboards deserved his shame. "I did," he said. The hollow's voice rose again, eager, oily. "Yes, ask him how, ask him what he took." Alara's pulse roared in her ears. "How?" The king didn't answer right away. He reached into his coat and drew out something small, a metal locket worn smooth by time. He held it in his palm, open where Alara could see. Inside was a faded sketch of her family, her father's strong brow, her mother's gentle eyes, and Alara as a child laughing with snow on her hair. Alara's breath left her body in a thin, stunned line. "That was ours," she whispered. "We lost it when the river ice broke," the king finished quietly. Alara stared at him. Her mind raced through memory. The day the world changed, the day her father never came home, the day the village spoke in careful voices and then eventually stopped speaking at all. The king's expression tightened with restraint, like he was holding back a confession that could shatter her. "Your father came to my border that night," he said, "not with a weapon, with a plea." Alara's knees weakened. "My father wouldn't." "He would," the king said gently, and there was respect in it. "Because he was brave in the way that doesn't make songs. He came to ask me to protect you." The cabin creaked, the panel's seam widened. A cold draft slid through, carrying a scent like extinguished candles. Alara's voice came out raw. "Protect me from what?" The king's answer was quiet, and it broke something in her chest in the best and worst way. "From my own kind." Outside, far away, a wolf howled. The hollow seemed to listen, pleased, as if it liked the sound of fear. "My court wanted your village as a feeding ground," the king said. "I refused. Refusal has a cost. Your father offered me something more valuable than gold to seal the border." Alara swallowed hard. "What?" The king lifted the locket slightly, then lowered it again like a weight. "He offered me his faith," he said, "and his solitude." Alara's breath hitched. "You claimed his solitude." "I accepted his promise," the king corrected, his voice breaking around the edges. "He asked me to take the loneliness he carried so you would not have to inherit it. He believed if one of us held it, if it had a name and a place, it would not scatter into your life like ash. The hollow surged at the panel, furious now, as if the truth was a light it couldn't bear. The wood split with a sharp crack. Alara stumbled back, tears burning. All these months she'd thought her father had been taken by the river, by accident, by cruel weather. Now the story was bigger and somehow more tender. He made a bargain not to gain anything but to keep her safe. The king stepped closer, careful not to crowd her. I did not come to claim you, he said. I came because the thing that hunts Solitude has found the trail your father tried to bury. And if it takes you, he swallowed, and humility turned his power into something almost human. Then your father's courage becomes a tragedy instead of a gift. Alara's hands shook. So what do you want from me? The king lifted his gaze, and in it Alara saw a loneliness that matched her own, older, heavier, but not proud of itself. I want you to stop paying for protection with silence, he said. Come with me to my keep. There are wards older than this cabin. There are people, yes, people who will help. And there is a way to end the Hollow's hunger, but it requires the one thing it cannot survive. Alara's voice was barely a whisper. What's that? The king's answer was soft, almost reverent. Connection. The panel burst inward with a gust of cold so sharp it stole Alara's breath. The shadow that spilled through wasn't a body. It was an absence, darkness shaped like longing. And in the center of that darkness, a familiar voice spoke aloud, warm and heartbreakingly real. Alara, it said, sounding exactly like her father. Open the door, let me come home. Alara's hand lifted toward it before she could stop herself. Alara's fingers hovered inches from the spreading shadow, trembling with a hope she hated and a grief she couldn't control. The voice was perfect, her father's gentle cadence, the way he used to say her name like it was something worth saving. Behind her, the king did not yank her away. He did not shout, he did not command. He simply placed his hand over his own heart, as if reminding himself what mattered, and said, If you choose it, I will not punish you for wanting him. That almost broke her more than the mimicry did. Alara blinked hard, forcing tears back until the room sharpened. The shadow's edges quivered, eager. It wasn't trying to attack, it was trying to be believed. You can't be him, Alara whispered, voice raw. My father wouldn't ask me to do this. The shadow shifted, and for a heartbeat she saw the outline of her father's shoulders, the curve of his smile. I'm cold, it said softly. Just let me in. Alara's knees buckled with longing. Her whole life lately had been a closed door, a lock, a promise to never risk loss again. Now the hollow was offering her the one thing she'd never stopped wanting, a way out of the ache. The king stepped closer, still not touching her, still not stealing her choice. Alara, he said, your solitude has been a fortress, but a fortress can become a prison if you never open the gates for anyone safe. The word safe pierced her fog. Alara turned her head slightly. And you're safe. The king's mouth tightened. I am dangerous, he admitted, and the honesty made it hit harder. But I am also restrained, and I am trying every night to be worthy of the promises I demand from others. The shadow hissed, a sound like wind through dead reeds. He's lying, it whispered, voice shifting now, half her father, half something hungry. He came to claim you. The king did not deny the word, he reshaped it. I came to claim what is killing you, he said. Not to own it, to name it, to carry it with you until it becomes lighter. Alara looked at the thin salt line at the threshold, gray and fragile, still holding. She looked at the king's hands, open, unarmed. She remembered how he stepped back from her door, how he asked, how he waited. She remembered the way he said he would not make war in her home. Courage didn't feel like a sword. It felt like a breath you didn't want to take, and taking it anyway. Alara lowered the poker to the floor. The metal clinked softly like an ending. If you're wearing my father's voice, she said to the hollow, then you'll answer like him. The shadow stilled. Alara's throat tightened. What did you teach me when I was scared of the dark? The hollow hesitated just long enough. It guessed, and to hide, it said smoothly, To stay quiet. Alara's eyes filled again, but this time not with weakness, with recognition. No, she whispered. He taught me to light a candle. The king's gaze sharpened, understanding what she was about to do. Alara stepped to the lamp and lifted it with both hands. The warm glow trembled, but it did not go out. She carried it toward the broken panel, toward the shadow that wanted her to live forever behind locked doors. The hollow recoiled not from brightness alone, but from what the brightness represented, a choice to see the truth. Alara's voice steadied as she spoke, not to the creature but to herself. You don't get to use my love as a weapon. The shadow writhed, expanding, trying to fill the room with a cold that tasted like surrender. Alara felt her grief surge, huge and heavy, and then she felt something else beneath it, the quiet strength her father had tried to hand her. The king moved beside her, not in front of her this time, but with her, a partnership offered instead of demanded. He removed a ring from his finger, dark metal, etched with tiny symbols like claw marks made careful. He set it on the table with a soft click, as if laying down authority. My crown cannot end this, he said, but your courage can. Alara glanced at him, startled. What are you doing? Choosing humility, he answered. The hollow was born from kings who never did. The room shook as the shadow pushed forward, desperate. Alara held the lamp higher, closer. Light spilled into the absence, and for a moment the hollow's borrowed voice cracked, slipping into something childlike and furious. I was made, it hissed, by promises that broke. The king's face tightened with pain, and Alara suddenly understood. He didn't just fear the hollow. He carried guilt for it, not because he created it himself, but because his throne sat on the ruins of old harm. Then we will make a new promise, Alara said, voice trembling but firm. She looked directly at the darkness. Not to hide, not to steal, not to rule alone. The hollow lurched toward the lamp and the flame guttered hard. Alara's instinct screamed to retreat, to close the door of her heart again. Instead, she did the bravest thing she'd done in months. She reached out and took the king's hand. The contact was cold, yes, but steady, human in its steadiness. The king's fingers tightened around hers like an oath. The hollow shrieked without sound, and the cabin filled with a pressure like deep water. The lamp flame bent sideways, nearly snuffed. The king leaned close, his voice a rough whisper meant only for her. There is one final ward, he said, but it requires you to speak my true name. Alara's heart stuttered. Your true name. His eyes met hers, fear and trust tangled together. If you speak it willingly, he said, you will be tying your solitude to mine. The hollow will lose its grip. Alara stared at him, stunned by what he was offering. Not power over her bonding, risk, a shared vulnerability. The lamp flame flickered on the edge of darkness, and the hollow surged one last time, reaching for Alara's grief like a hand reaching for a handle. Alara opened her mouth and realized she didn't know what name to say. The cabin felt impossibly small for a decision that could reshape two worlds. Alara's fingers stayed locked with the king's, and she felt the tiniest tremor in his hand, proof that his calm had always been chosen, not effortless. The hollow pressed in, whispering with her father's voice again, softer now, more convincing. You don't know him, you can't trust him, you'll be alone again. Alara closed her eyes for a heartbeat and listened past the creature's performance, past the storm, past the fear. She listened for the quiet truth underneath it all, the way the king had waited at her door, the way he'd placed himself between her and the dark, the way he had set down his ring like an apology to the world. Trust, Alara realized, wasn't certainty. It was courage with open hands. She opened her eyes and looked at him. Tell me, she whispered, say your true name so I can choose it. The king's throat worked as if the word itself hurt. It is the one thing I do not give lightly, he said, voice strained. Not because it is precious, because it is dangerous. To you, Alara asked. To anyone, he answered. A true name is a doorway. Alara nodded, tears clinging to her lashes. Then let it be a doorway that opens to something better. For a moment, the king simply stared at her as though he'd forgotten what hope looked like. Then, with the humility of someone stepping off a throne and into honesty, he leaned close to her ear. And he spoke it. The name was soft and ancient, and when it reached Alara's heart, it felt strangely familiar, like a melody she'd heard as a child and never understood until now. Alara drew in a steadying breath. The hollow surged, sensing it was about to lose. The lamp flame snapped and shook, pushed to the brink. Alara held on to the king's hand and spoke his true name into the room like a candle being lit on purpose. Not as a spell to control him, as a promise to stand with him. The air shuddered. The hollow recoiled as if struck not by force but by meaning. The borrowed voice broke apart into fragments, her father's warmth, her own grief, the bitter echo of old cruelty. It tried to cling to Alara's longing, but the bond she'd chosen made that longing something shared instead of isolated. And loneliness, when shared, stopped being a feast. The shadow thinned, unraveling into the cold air like smoke that couldn't decide how to exist. The pressure lifted. The lamp flame straightened and burned clean and steady, brighter than it had any right to. Alara's breath came in a sob she didn't fight. She didn't feel fixed. She felt present. The king exhaled shakily, and for the first time warmth seemed to touch his face. Not heat, not sunlight, but relief. He looked at Alara as though she had handed him back a piece of his own soul. "It's gone," Alara whispered, voice trembling. The king nodded, eyes shining with something he didn't let fall. "For now," he said, "curses don't always die. Sometimes they become choices we refuse to repeat." Alara glanced at the ring he'd set down. "Your crowns." He looked at it with a kind of tired tenderness. "A crown is not a heart," he said. "I have ruled like I could carry everything alone. That was my pride dressed up as duty." He reached for the ring, then stopped. "I will return to my keep," he said, "and change what I can, not with fear, with restraint, with kindness where my kind expects dominance." Alara's voice was small. "And what about me?" The old Alara would have asked that like a sentence, like she was doomed to return to quiet rooms and colder nights. But something in her had shifted, not the need for solitude, but the shape of it. Solitude, she realized, was meant to be a resting place, not a grave. The king's gaze softened. "I did not come to steal your solitude," he said. "I came because it deserved to be honored, and because you deserve to be safe inside it." He hesitated, and the humility returned, steady, genuine. "If you wish, you may come with me and help build a border that doesn't require sacrifices like your father's. If you wish, you may stay here and live your quiet life with the knowledge that your door can open without destroying you." Alara looked around her cabin. The stove, the lamp, the worn floorboards that had held her up when she thought she couldn't stand. This place had saved her, but it had also been teaching her the wrong lesson, that surviving meant disappearing. She swallowed and reached for her father's coat, lifting the blanket away. Her fingers brushed the sleeve, and for a moment she felt grief, sharp, honest, unavoidable. Then she felt gratitude. "He wanted me to live," she whispered. Well, the king nodded. "He did." Alara walked to the door and opened it wide. Snow gusted in, cold and clean. The night air hit her face like truth. She stood there anyway. "I will keep my solitude," she said, then looked back at the king. "But I won't worship it." The king's expression softened into something like wonder. "That," he murmured, "is freedom." When dawn finally diluted the sky from black to deep blue, the king stepped onto the porch and paused. He didn't vanish. He didn't threaten. He turned back as if the simple act of saying goodbye mattered. "Alara," he said gently, "if the night ever knocks again." Alara's hand rested on the doorframe, steady now. "Then I'll decide," she replied, "not fear, not grief, me." The king inclined his head, respect, not ownership, and disappeared into the falling snow. Alara stood alone in the doorway for a long moment, feeling the strange quiet that comes after a storm passes, not empty, not numb, peaceful. And when another knock finally came days later, it wasn't from the inside of the walls or the hunger of darkness. It was from a neighbor holding a basket of bread, eyes nervous but hopeful. Lara breathed in, felt her heart steady, and opened the door.